Welcome to the party, people. Mark Price here, devslopes.com. Today is the day that you have been waiting for. We're going to learn about Flux. You're like, I wasn't waiting for that. Well, this is going to be cool. So here's the deal. React was built to be very modularized, okay? Meaning your view components are just views, okay? You don't want a whole bunch of crazy business logic in there with data, things like that, okay? If you go to the React website, so if we just type in React, I'll just type in JS here, just so it pops up at the top. Okay, so here it is. Lots of people use React as the V in model view controller. Okay, since React makes no assumptions about the rest of your technology stack, it is easy to try it out on a small feature in an existing project. So you can put React anywhere for your views. Okay, you can plug them in anywhere. And then however you want to get data to them, you can. There's lots of different design patterns that you can do in programming, and you can get data into your views, okay? However, there's no good way of working with React if you don't use a Flux architecture, okay? You can put data into it, but however you do it, if you're not using the Flux way, it's not going to be the most elegant solution. You're going to have code repetition, and it's not overall a great thing to do, although they've left it open for that. And it's not their fault. It's not Facebook's fault. It's just the way it is. There's no good architecture for managing data with your views if you're using React. It can be done, and I'm doing it on my website. I'm not using Flux on my website. If you remember from previous videos, I've got these two little components here that are done in React and pull out dynamic data. But they're not implemented. Hey, a pop-up, 100% free, yes. They're not implemented using any type of Flux architecture, and so there's some code workarounds I had to do. So not ideal. So what is Flux? Flux is the application architecture that Facebook uses for building client-side web applications. It complements React's composable view components by utilizing a unidirectional data flow. It's more of a pattern rather than a formal framework, and you can start using Flux immediately without a lot of new code. So this is on the Flux website, okay, right here, and I clicked learn more about Flux. And if you scroll down, they've got some diagrams that talk about actions, dispatchers, stores, and views, and they talk a lot about other things here too. And to be honest, their description of it is not that great. Even in their video, it's not that great. She's explaining stuff as she's on there, and it's a little bit garbled. So I don't recommend that you read this. You can, though, if you want the official formal Facebook definition. I'm going to explain to you how it really works, and then we're going to talk about Reflux as well, too, in this video, as well as in the videos to come. Okay, so I'm just going to draw it out. You have this page for your reference here. So I'm going to pull up my handy-dandy notebook. Maybe. There it is. Okay. Here we go. You're like, he's going to draw again. Sorry, guys and gals. Okay. So, let's talk about what's happened in the past with traditional architectures like MVC. And if you don't know what MVC is, that's Model View Controller. Okay? So, you've got model, which is your data. Okay? And then you've got your view, which is the actual view component that the user sees. And then you've got this controller, okay? And so what happens is your view will talk to your controller, okay? And your data, and your controller will grab data, and it will shove it back into your view, okay? So this controller is like the workhorse, grabbing data, putting it into your view. The view talks to the controller, vice versa. And, you'd think that would work really well. But with React, it doesn't. And here's the reason why. So if you've done this already, you can pull up in your project or just follow along with me. But if we look at the simple application that we built for fetching data, okay, this is in the simple HTTP fetch app. And anyway, what's happening here is we've got this simple to-do list, right? We've got a list. We've got list items. So the to-do list items inside of it. And then we've got an HTTP service which talks to our server and retrieves the data. So here's what's happening. So in component wheel mount, so when the list first shows up on the screen, we hit the server. Okay, so we go to our HTTP service, we hit the server, it gives us data back, and then it shoves it back into our view here, and then we pass it down to our list items. You're like, okay, well that works just fine, right? So we've kind of got this view is kind of being a controller and a view. It looks like they're kind of mixed together, and it's talking to like a service that's getting data. This might be our model layer maybe, and is passing it back to the view. But here's the problem. So we've got a list of ingredients that we're hitting here, right? What if a different part of my web app is not a list, okay, but it still needs to hit the ingredients web endpoint? What if it's a new page and we have a cool function on our recipes website that grabs a random ingredient and shows it onto the page? Okay, we want to use the same data store, right? With our HTTP service. So here's the problem. We would create a new component like so. So let's just pretend. So let's go down here and pretend. Let's call this, random ingredient. Well, what we would have to do is copy and paste this code. We are copying and pasting code. That is so bad. So we're copying this code to fetch data, okay, and hit the server. Now here's something interesting. So, okay, maybe it's not too bad. We're copying and pasting code. I can live with that. We have two different components that are both hitting the same data source. What happens if in our list right here, the user adds a new ingredient to the list, okay? And it hits the server. How is this other component going to know that the data's changed? There's no communication there. And so we could write some convoluted code to really start having things talk to each other, follow some different patterns, but it becomes very complex and not ideal, because here's the problem with React. Data comes from the top down, right? From the top level down. We don't have our components within components, hitting the server, downloading stuff. Data comes from the top down, and this model it's not going to work. We're repeating code. These guys can't talk to each other. Nothing's really connected, okay? So this is one of the problems that Facebook was trying to solve when they came out with Flux. And again, go to the website, watch the video on it. But they want to solve this problem of repeating code and things just not syncing and talking to each other. And so introducing Flux. Now back to our notepad here. Okay, so that was MVC, right? Model View Controller. Okay, so let's go ahead and get rid of all this junk I just drew. Okay, so let's talk about Flux. Okay, so the idea behind Flux is we've got, let's call this our component, okay? And really your component should have a container. You know how we have a list that has list items? Technically, the list is kind of a container. So let's pretend that this little box in here, okay, this is our view components, but this outer shell, we're going to call this a controller component. We've already kind of done it, but I'm just explicitly stating it, that it's kind of our controller, okay? And so what's going to happen, and then it's going to pass data down into our view. So, this is like the list manager. So you could have a list manager and then have a list inside of it and list items inside of the list itself. And the manager is kind of your controller. So here's the idea behind Flux, okay? So you've got your components. You're used to seeing this. Well, now we have something here called a store. Not like Walmart. Ugh. Definitely not like Walmart. This is a data store. Okay? And so the idea is you create a data store for every type of data that you want to store. So let's say in a to-do app, or let's say just on a big application, like it's a personal life management application, and it has many different things. One of the things that it provides, one of the features, is a to-do app. So let's say this is our to-do store. So this is where we're going to access data for our to-do items. And let's say we have another store here, okay? And let's call this a feed store. You're like, for horses? No, not for horses. Come on, people. Get with the program here. A feed store, like as in a data feed, like maybe like a news feed, or, happy spiritual thoughts feed to get your day started right. And so we have two different data stores here, okay? We've got a feed store, and we've got let's call this an inspiration, okay? Inspiration feed store, all right? It's not hay, all right? So we've got two different stores there, and here's the idea is that your controller, your top level, so pretend, you had your list manager or whatever, your top level component, it's going to register little dashed line here. It's going to register with the data store. It's going to say register, and it's going to want to register to know when data changes. So register callback. It's going to register a callback function. Basically, it's going to register an area or a function that will be called whenever data changes. So register callback on change. So whenever data changes in the data store, this guy wants to know about it. Our controller wants to know about it, okay? So that's what's going to happen. And so if we had another controller component, you know, it might listen to the feed store. I'm just showing you here that you can have multiple stores. Okay, so that's the first thing. Your controller is listening for a change, okay? And so let's say that this is a to-do item, or excuse me, a to-do app, and the user just created a new to-do item. So we just created what's called an action. So I'm going to call this create to-do. So it just created an action. So what it's going to do is it's going to call our actions. Okay, this is another part of Flux. You have actions, an actions module or class or whatever you want to call it. It's an action. So basically what happens is your views will create actions that'll talk to the action object here, okay? And then there's one more piece here. We have a dispatcher. You know, like when someone calls 911, you know, someone's robbing me. And, you know, where's your location, ma'am? And then they dispatch police officers to your house, depending on which country you live. Some countries, they probably just let it happen. Anyway, so action dispatcher. So what happens is your action, you've created an action. And so this one's called a create, you know, to-do action. That's the action that we created. So the action's like, hey, yo, dispatcher, we need to create a to-do. Boom. So your dispatcher's like, okay, you know, well, let's dispatch to the stores that want to hear about this. Well, feed store does not want to hear about the create to do because it has to do with feeds. And so our dispatcher is going to talk to our data store. And it's going to be like, yo, data store, we just created a new to do. Here it is. So, you know, it's creating the to do. It's passing it along. Okay. So the to do's over here, zoom, zoom, it's getting passed along. And our data store is like, yo, what do we do with this data? So the data store is like, do I post it to a server? Do I just keep it here locally? You know, and you know, you could have a server here. You know, this is your server. Or, you know, Aunt Betty. Okay. Oh, she's fugly. All right. So, that is not what I wanted to do. Distracting. That's the cloud. That's what I meant to do. A cloud. Okay. So what's happening is your to-do is going here into your data store. Your data store is like, okay, what do I do with the data? Maybe it talks to the server or whatever. And then the server sends data back. But here's the important thing. Your data store is like, okay, now I've got new data. Let's notify anybody who's listening for that data change. Which in this case, this guy's listening. Our controller's listening. So it's gonna it's gonna send. I don't know why I made dashed lines on these, just to show you that they mean something. And so this is going to call the callbacks. That almost sounds like a band name or something. It's going to call the callbacks, and it's going to give it the new data. Okay? So, does this start to make sense? Okay, so the idea is now, let's say that's my list component. Well, let's say I have different components, not just lists, but other components that need the to-do information. So remember, this is my random ingredient page, okay? Some type of language I'm writing there. And so, you know, this is our controller component, and inside of it, it has some type of views, some type of miniature components. Let's say I have 3 components total. What's another thing that might want ingredients? That's not a list, right? So whatever, it doesn't matter. We have 3 views that all need the to-dos, ingredients, to-dos, whatever. So 3 components that need this data. Well, here's the cool thing. So the dispatcher hit the data store. The data store got new data, okay? And here's the cool thing. So when the data store is like, okay, we have new data now, and it did whatever it needed to do, maybe talk to the server, put it in a database, not only will this component be updated, but it will call the callbacks on this component. Just some nice sound effects. And it will call this component's callback, and it will pass the new data in. And guess what? That all happens in your React component listener, you create a listener function, and it will set the state. Okay, it will set the state with the new data, and then your components re-render. So literally, if you have 5 different components in your application that are all running at the same time, and you update the data store from one of them, and action updates your data store, all of them will in turn be updated. How cool is that? They'll all be instantly updated. So that's the idea behind Flux. Okay, so to reemphasize, the controller goes from here down to here to your action, or excuse me, your controller is what registers. Okay, starting over. Number 1, your controller registers with the data store saying, hey, I want to be notified when changes happen. Number 2, your view components that are inside of your controller, okay, your main component, okay, it will create actions. So in the like physical actions, so like when the user clicks something, adds a new to-do, deletes an item, whatever your action may be, okay? So number 2 is the action's going to be created over here in the actions, okay? That's number 2. Number 3, the action talks to the dispatcher and says, hey, dispatcher, let the data stores know that I've got an action to create a to-do item. So anyone who cares about to-do items, let's let them know so they can figure out what to do. And so the dispatcher's like, hey, yo, data store, here's some new data, do whatever you want with it. And data store's like, okay, so that's 3, right? The dispatcher's talking to the data store, okay? And then the data store, number 4, will store it, retrieve it from the server, whatever it's going to do. It's going to process that data, all right? And then number 5, it's going to call back any listeners on any of these controller components. It's going to call them back with the new data so they're instantly updated. Okay, is that making sense? It makes a lot more sense in code. So I'm going to show that to you now. I'm going to show you the Facebook code so you can get a better idea. I never really quite understood Flux until I looked at the code, and I'm sorry this is long-winded, but this is very important to understand thoroughly, very thoroughly. Okay, so people say I have a problem saying thoroughly, whatever. So here we go. This is a to-do item list from Facebook, okay? And I'm just going to show you a few pieces in their list to demonstrate what I was just telling you about. So what they have is a to-do app, okay? And they call it an app. It's their controller. It's their container. You can call it a container if you want. It still is a component. If you see right here, this to-do app is still a component, but it's the component that manages the data from the most top level. So anytime I say controller component or container component, okay, I'm talking about the overall component that manages the subcomponents, the children, and manages the data. Okay, so here's a few important things to know. They've got a get to do state. So this is a function that will call into the stores and get data from them as needed, okay? So they just put that function over here. If they want to get all the to-dos or things like that, they just call this get to do state. Okay, just created a single function to grab the data. And here's their store. They have a to-do store like I was telling you about. Okay, so for instance, get initial state. Rather than defining the data here like we've done in the past with test data, their initial state is coming from the store because it's calling this function. It's grabbing the data from the store. Okay, here's something very, very important. On component did mount, to-do store, add change listener. Okay, so what we're saying here is, hey, let's talk to the store and tell them I want to listen for notifications. And so it's passing in a function, this.onChange, which is down here. So in get or in component did mount, we are passing in this function right here on change to our store. So when the data changes in the store, it's going to call this function right here, and this function is going to set the state. It's going to call get to do state, which is in turn going to grab the new to-dos. Okay? So that's what's happening. We're listening for it. And of course, when component will unmount, we remove itself from a listener. So when this is not on the screen anymore, we don't want to listen for those things. We don't want floating objects or memory leaks. So let's remove that listener. Okay, so that's all really. That's here at this top level. You were just listening like I explained to you. So remember now, you first listen for it, and then what happens? An action happens, right? So we go into the to-do item, okay? And that's where the action is going to happen. And so, well, they even broke it up now. So they have a text input. So the text input calls, so when the user enters text and then they press save, it calls the function on to-do item to actually save it. So this is where the save callback's happening here on the to-do item. And so if we go look at the save, on save, okay, it's saying to-do actions, update text. So it's calling the actions. So let's think about where we are now. So the to-do app, the container app, it registered for a callback so it could make changes whenever data changes. It registered that with the store. The to-do item itself, the actual components where the user makes actions, those are going to talk to the actions, as you can see right here. So we're calling to-do actions.update text. Okay, so let's go look at that now, the to-do actions over here. And we're calling, in this case, update text. It could, let's look at the create example when you create a new to-do item. So the actions are talking to the dispatcher. So here it is, app dispatcher, and it's dispatching a type. So to do constants to do create. So Facebook in this example application, they put all of the names of their actions in a constants file, like you can see right here. Nothing crazy. It's just a bunch of objects here. Okay, as you can see right here with actual names. Okay, so they use these names to determine which type of action it is. So anyway, we've created an action right here, and we're passing in the data. Okay, in this case, it's just the keyword text. You know, it could be data, it could be anything you want it to be, but we're dispatching an action, create app dispatcher.dispatch. Okay, so you're like, okay, well, how does this get over to our store? Well, we haven't looked at the store yet. Let's do that now. So let's go into the to-do store. Okay, and here's the important thing. App dispatcher. You know how we just dispatched it and I said, how does it know to talk to the store? Well, your data store registers itself with the dispatcher saying, hey, I want to know whenever changes come through that I care about. Okay, and so in this case, that change was just made. So this is going to be called down here, and it's going to go through the different type of actions, whether it's create or complete all or complete. And so it's going to call to-do store.emit change. So whenever the data change, this data store is going to call emit change on the to-do store. Okay, and so that's going to go right here, and emit change is right here. And so it's making a change event. And so because of the frameworks that are going on behind the scenes, our to-do store now knows that there were changes made. Okay, and so the changes get made, and I am just looking for. Okay, so if it was a create, if the change was a create event, like as you can see right here, okay, if the change that was emitted was this event right here, this is going to be called, and it's going to create a new to-do item here, okay, and it's going to put it in the data store. And one more thing to show you here. Let me just find it. Okay, so add change listener. This is what our controller component registered with. It added itself as it's added its callback, and so whenever that change happens, okay, first the dispatcher sends it to this data store here, and then the data saved, however it's saved. You know, it could be stored in a database. We have it here locally, whatever, however it's stored. Okay, then this change listener is going to be called. So on this change event, so if it's the proper event, we're going to call it back. And then our controller component is going to get that information and then ask the store for the new data. Okay, so that's how the process works. Now, it can be complex. Luckily, we're going to be using Reflux in this course, and Reflux takes all this and simplifies it incredibly. And so we're going to talk about Reflux in the next video, but this is how it works. This is everything that I just explained on the drawing. I just walked you through the code here. Okay, they've just got different functions that do different things for the data, update all, return all. But anyway, here's the list of to-dos where it actually stores. You know, this, you might have this locally and on a database, or you might not have this at all, and you might just talk directly with a server in a database. However you want to structure your data, you can do that here. In this case, they just kept it a local variable, and that's where they're storing all of their data. One more thing I want to point out. So if you remember my drawing, we had an action and a dispatcher. These two things kind of do the same thing. Like, why call an action and just forward it to the dispatcher? Now, with Facebook and huge applications, you know, they've very much modularized this in a certain way, and they've built it a certain way for certain reasons, which I don't completely understand. But they're not completely necessary to have both of them separated. In fact, Flux makes this much easier. And so we're going to talk about Flux in the next video. I'm going to end this one now because it's gone on. And anyway, last thing here, I'm going to sign this for you. So in case I'm ever famous, you can take a screenshot here. And there's my signature. Not really. And that's it. Mark Price here, devslopes.com. This is your intro into the world of Flux. And remember, to get your free live help, go to devslopes.com and click on chat room. I'm there all the time, as well as a huge community of other students.